Hello, my name is Brock Davignon. I'm proud to be a student of Ted Danielewski, his professional screenwriters workshop, lessons that have put me in good stead my entire life. I'm now 69, and I would like to talk from the year 2023 about the year 1984. Ted had a line to us, which was, comedy is serious business. You really have to concentrate to think about it. Timing and all sorts of issues and things that mean something to people that will make them laugh and keep them laughing. And he, one day in an actor's workshop, asked me, well, Brock, who would you like to learn comedy from? And I thought, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. So he says, okay. He asked a few others. So the next Wednesday, like in 1 week, in Provo, Utah, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau were sitting in a theater in the Harris Fine Arts Center at BYU, which I just understand now it's getting older as a building, and they're going to tear it down and build a new, highly rewired communications college building. And the Harris Fine Arts Center was and is still one of the more advanced sets of everything from fine arts to public relations, television production, small, medium, and large, to network, satellite TV. I learned all sorts of interesting things in that building. Most interesting person in it, outside of some wonderful professors I had in organizational communications, public relations, advertising, Irwin Goodman, Richard Barris in advertising, Rulon Bradley in public relations. All of these people taught us how to look out for a small group, a niche minority, and what their interests are, and to speak to them and to represent their interests in a story, in a press release, in a PR campaign, and that the minority of one can be right and everybody else wrong. And what it takes to stand up to pressure when you are that minority or are trying to get a few more people to follow you or your point of view. And these lessons are always driven home to me, not like business students do with case studies, but we had real client projects, and we solved problems for a fellow with a pressure cooker that used oil to be like the Kentucky Fried thing, because he made the Kentucky Colonel famous, but he wanted a home version, not big vats. And how we had to throw out many ideas and a lot of assumptions in order to deal with where statistics told us was a problem. For instance, 93% of all women are afraid of pressure cookers because they'll have a hole in their ceiling and they might lose their vase. And so if you ignore that spike and that fear, as opposed to confronting it and explaining you've got something better than a submarine hatch, that this lid is never coming off, and what you can do with it with 22 different kinds of spices is beside the point. And so Tad taught us to confront evil, the worst in people, prejudice, all sorts of assumptions that people gain. And this came home to me when Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau were sitting there, and subsequently what we did with what they taught us, all under Tad's, kibitzing and coaching and direction. Well, there was probably at least a couple hundred of us students sitting in, I think it was the Pardo Theater, or the de Young, in the Harris Fine Arts Center. And there they were, big as life, and I'm like, oh, well, it's nice to have somebody listen to me. And so Ted starts things off, and the first thing that comes out of Jack Lemmon's mouth is, comedy is serious business. And he doesn't get quite the laugh he expected, because we'd all heard the line from Tad Danielewski. He says, "Oh, I forgot, we're all students at Tad Danielewski." And Walter Matthau says, "You dummy," you know. And so they proceed to explain how you play off of a fall guy or gal and the funny person, and never underestimate anybody's comedic genius. And they had mentioned that Lucille Ball had invented the 3-camera shoot, where a lot of television was just done with 2 cameras, a close-up and an establishing shot, and she had a third one that was more active at her Desilu studios. And where she might play this ditz, this was a very bright lady, and a very sophisticated lady with science fiction, brought us, you know, everything from Star Trek to Jim Bowie, you know, and when she started it out. And she was a very unassuming person, he said, and that she was really the one of the brains in the bunch. Desi could do the deals, but she had the vision. And so this was ringing in my head among many other things they said. And the subsequent class period, Tad says he was been a coach for the NBC actors, directors, screenwriters in New York. And he said they sent me a script and they'd like me to review it and or rework it. But I told them that my students would be doing that under my direction. I said, okay, well, and so basically he summarizes the script, that it's a dark script designed for episodic television, where there's a spider-like sheriff, female sheriff, who is going to make victims of people that come through the town. And in a small Texas town, which I've been through, it would be very hard to put that many graves if you had a hit show in a town without them being noticed, or all these people keep missing on that highway. And so I questioned what it was and why they wanted a sex-crazed, you know, female sheriff in this kind of a role, outside of them wanting more women, perhaps, as a demographic to approach. I'm working on women leading interactive television here as a demographic, so I understand these things. But to speak for women, I kind of role-played, and I thought about this, and so Ted says, "You want a shot at it?" I said, "Yeah, I would." And so I came back literally the next class period, just on a writing binge, that the sheriff would be cast as someone that the audience generally thinks is a comedian ditz, but is actually a smart woman, a wise woman, and would surprise the audience, being maybe not exactly cross-cast, but, you know, a different assets that they have besides the fact that they look pretty. And they were intent on having a blonde, and like, okay, I would have cast some in Texas, perhaps a Hispanic or Comanche sheriff. But what I did was make the sheriff the protagonist, not the antagonist, that was a smart and wise woman. And the men around her might be a little dense, but she would help people along their way through the Texas town in whatever the incident or crisis that happened. And there are people passing through his relationship with people in the town. So Tad says, "I like it. This is exactly what I was hoping for." He says, "It looks like you listened to Jack Lemmon and Matthau." And I go, "Yeah, I did." And it struck me that this was all wrong. And you could do a very positive show almost endlessly doing this way. So the working title was She's the Sheriff. And I had actually recommended that Suzanne Summers, who was playing a airhead blonde on Three's Company for all sorts of T&A, as they call it, would actually be an effective sheriff. She was into a variety of other things in health and whatnot. And to this day, I do not believe that anybody ever informed her that Ted Danielewski or I had recommended her for the role, and perhaps I should. Invite her to Women Leading Interactive TV. But she's into all sorts of good health and nutrition and HGH therapies, all sorts of things she's into. And this is a smart woman. And I knew that then, just by watching the way she acted, even though it was counter to what she was playing. So I never really, Three's Company never appealed to me that much because they thought they were underplaying the actresses. And Ritter was great, so was Tex Ritter, his dad. And but he was the star, and he was paid twice as much. And I think she eventually left it because she couldn't get a pay raise because the audience statistics were saying they were watching her as much as him, and the other female lead as well. So anyway, it was a success, and it ran for 5 years. And I had another professor whose name was Erwin Goodman, who was learning from Tad to do real client project-based learning. And in this thing, I was uncredited, never have been credited, but I worked with other great actors, directors that Tad brought in. Jack Elam is one. I'll tell another story about that later. But what we did from that point forward was what a lot of people in successive decades, I think, have made a lot of progress on, and in terms of minorities in front of and behind the camera. Tad once explained that he didn't like the movie Yentl because everybody was too clean. Everybody in Eastern Europe at the time had charcoal over their hands and their faces. They cooked with charcoal and burnt wood in stoves, and it was just all over everybody. And he said the second thing wrong with the movie was that Jewish women are not kept out of yeshivas. It's not for boys only. And this pretense that it was to create some dramatic form fell flat, certainly with the Jewish audience, who knew better. And he's a member of the Academy Award, Arts and Sciences, Academy of Arts and Sciences. And he's gotten Emmys, he's gotten Academy Awards. And so he was one of these people voted. And he says one of the problems with the Academy is the legacy of people who were dominantly white or Protestant tended to be the people judging the movie. So if there was a movie that came forward about a woman or a minority woman or whatever the distinctive narrow group is that gave them character or a philosophy or a set of ethics or culture that brought something to the script and the story, they didn't get the awards. They might get nominated, but they rarely would get the awards. And that was, back in the 70s and 80s he was saying this, and it's taken Hollywood a long time to adopt technologies, much less minorities. And I've had occasion to sell fax machines and PBX phone systems to studios that were still wired in the 1930s with all of the insulation worn off the wires and strung all over the Warner lot or Castle Rock, and wired these things up. Well, the rest of the business world already had fax machines 1, 2, or more decades earlier. You rent everything in Hollywood sometimes. But that was no excuse for having permanent facilities so archaic. So change happened slowly. And he recommended to us, you guys cut through butter like a hot knife by going for the stories that have been neglected. There's a lot of wonderful stories throughout the world in all cultures. And he says, look for those. And that was one of the things that Walter Matthau had discussed with us. And the population of BYU is sort of a global culture in one spot in Utah, as well as other campuses it has in Idaho and Hawaii and other islands, Mexico and so forth. And so the audience itself was receptive to what he was saying, or either that or Matthau was observant, and played to that. But he was right. And Tad reinforced that with us. And even when he'd show us some movie like Buster Keaton, where he's the fall guy, all the things happen to him, but he deals with it with equanimity, and that's what's funny. And as a boy, I would get up on Saturday at 6 o'clock and fix myself a breakfast and watch Buster Keaton on black and white television in 1959, 60. And I was preparing, getting charcoal out and a piece of paper, being quiet, and watching silent movies was a good way to do that before watching John Nagy learn how to draw. And I think I got as much out of Buster Keaton as I did John Nagy for storyboarding out ideas in my head at a young age. So when Tad would mention one of these or ask us who we thought was great, Alfred Hitchcock, somebody would say, he would show us, great masters movies or put something together himself as a collage to get across these points. And somebody who can laugh at themselves and make fun of themselves of a particular group or whatever. Today I'm dealing with, we've got a Charity Champions interactive TV network. And we're dealing with people who are woke versus others, and people beating up women who are men wanting to play in their sport and dominate it, and they're not liking it. And I'm saying, well, gee, when I was a high school wrestler, we had height and weight classes, and 20 years ago they went co-ed wrestling, and it was all by height and weight. It didn't matter anything else if you were in between this range and that tall. You can have a shrimp basketball league with me, or a regular size group, or the giraffes already seem to be taken care of with the NBA and so forth. This would bring peace. And Ted always taught us to look at the minority point of view. And I'm sometimes wondering if some films by his students haven't achieved that very, very well, even by titles. And so this is an important lesson that I learned from Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau that I would not have learned, or I might have learned it later in life, if Tad hadn't had the experiences in life he did, fighting for Jewish people not to be cooked in death camp incinerators or ovens, and trying to warn them. And he cried at night trying to figure out how he could get these people to get out of the cattle cars and follow him into the forest and fight. And they wouldn't get off. And he would agonize that there was something that he couldn't convey. And this was his driving point, was to explain evil to people, what good can be, but to do what you can to stand up for them. And he certainly, by blowing up a number of Nazi trains, did that. But it was still a matter of persuasion, that you have to care enough about yourself, your family, to not understand that the government might do something to you, your own or somebody else's. And the Germans and the Poles on those trains and political dissidents sometimes would get off. But just one or two out of a whole trainload. And this distressed him terribly. And so he made it his mission in life, this quiet mission, to convince people how to tell stories better. And look out for the little guy or the little gal, or the tall one perhaps. But anyway, these are the things that I learned that day. And that week was important for my whole life. And I hope you take it to heart. Thanks.